I want to, we are now live.
Last code is 603.
People will recognize both our guests and our on Zoom and those present here at the Cheshire County building that we are recording this session so that it can be used by Homeland Security, Emergency Management, and Cheshire County and Sullivan counties to communicate after today. I also want to remind folks that the Cheshire County building is a mask required area, and the mask we can mask during our session today for those present. Thank you very much. Yes.
I got a message from Representative Burge. He said the trouble doesn't have a Zoom.
He doesn't have a Zoom link.
Chris, can you send Paul Birch the link, please?
Thank you. Why don't we begin? There are folks present in the room, and I just want to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves, seeing as our camera or coverage may not cover everybody in the space. So turn to my left and ask Senator Ward if she'd introduce herself.
Route 4 District, Senate District 8, which has some of the Parkhead towns. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Representative Judy Aaron, representing Sullivan County District 7, which represents Ackworth, Goshen, Langdon, Webster, and Washington.
Good afternoon. My name is Grant Nichols. I'm the Assistant Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
Good afternoon. I'm Jen Harper. I'm the Director for New Hampshire Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
Fallon Reed, I'm the Chief of Preparedness, Mitigation, and Recovery with Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
Rod Bouchard, Assistant County Administrator, Cheshire County.
I'm Chris Coth, I'm the County Administrator for Cheshire County.
And would the guests in the room just introduce yourselves, please?
Corporal Chris, Public Works Director, Emergency Management Director, City of Keene. Don Lucier, City Engineer, Keene.
Brett Rustock, Keene Civil Engineer.
Lisa Murphy, Southwest Region Planning Commission.
Henry Underwood, Planner at Southwest Region Planning
Jamie Easterbergs, Public Systems Coordinator, Homeland Security, Emergency Management.
Emergency Management Director of Town.
Jennifer O'Leary, Public Systems Coordinator with Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
Brian Higgins, the Hazard Mitigation Officer for the Hazard District. Yeah.
Jake Carson,
I'm sorry.
FEMA.
Thank you, Jim.
Vanessa Flynn, the Community Outreach Coordinator for Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
Thank you.
For everyone in the room, please remember that the microphones and the speakers are up here on the table. So especially in the back, you're going to need to speak up. Use your outside voice for this one.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you for your assistance. Our August 16th meeting was recorded by the Cheshire County and is on the Cheshire County website and on YouTube.
Yes.
Is it on YouTube?
Well, it's fed from YouTube, yes, but you can access it from the county site.
So both are true.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for doing that. I just want to, before turning this meeting over to Homeland Security and Emergency Management, I want to recap the August 16th meeting because I think there were 4 observations I captured and I shared with our state agency guests who were present at that meeting, which included Homeland Security, Emergency Management, Department of Transportation and Environmental Services, and the Federal Small Business Administration. So the communication said that Homeland Security Emergency Management would continue working with the FEMA audit team and the towns to document storm-related damages. Don't know, Rod, if are you able to project this slide?
Yeah, just give me 1 second here. Which one is it that?
Disaster relief.
And
We convened towns from Sullivan and Cheshire County at that meeting on August 16th. It was following two, just the wettest July that any of us can remember, and two very heavy storms that affected Cheshire County, and both of them Sullivan County, certainly on the second one. Go to that second slide. So I just want to recap those four items. That we were working, hoping that Homeland Security Emergency Management could accelerate the process for disaster declarations presidentially issued for those two heavy storm incidents. They had said at that time that it would take probably 60 days for that process to complete. How prescient that insight was. The second is that they made very clear to all the towns that were present, to our county administrators, the importance for hazard mitigation plans. And I got to compliment Southwest Regional Planning Commission for their work with the towns. As I talked with towns over the last couple of months, I haven't heard anybody who said, "Oh my gosh, we're late getting these in." So there's really a really good local effort and a resource here locally to keep those hazard mitigation plans up to date, which is very important. It's important for what the Department of Environmental Services showed us and described as their geodatabase. It's a graphic interface of storm-related incidents and the impacts that they've had on every town across the state. So it's a terrific resource for all emergency management folks and town administrators, and very important that it be continuously updated as it is an integrated resource for the state. And then it was clear that folks attending the August meeting had asked for an integrated storm management source for reporting, recovery, and prevention. And so there's something on the to-do list. Recognize that it takes a lot of folks to coordinate an emergency response, and trying to put all that in one place was a request that came out of the meeting. So the next slide, 60 days have passed, and we thank, I do, on behalf of us who have been trying to advocate for Cheshire and Sullivan counties. I want to thank Homeland Security Emergency Management staff, Grant, Jen, Fallon, for your rapid work with the towns in our counties. Want to thank Department of Transportation for making sure that emergency access to towns and emergency responders to those towns, that those were insured as quickly as possible. And I know that there was really concerted effort by the department and the Department of Environmental Services for accelerating their processes of review as well. Over that time, 2 presidential disaster declarations have been subsequently issued very recently. We thank our FEMA guests for their work, and our congressional delegation for accelerating that work, advocating for that, and the governor for having worked with Homeland Security to get those letters out as quickly as possible. As I understand it, and I'm sure we're going to hear the guidance, we've got towns have 30 days in which to notify Homeland Security and Emergency Management, anticipating the 60-day horizon and anticipating the short turnaround for notice. That's why this meeting is scheduled for today. And it was just, so there we are. we had an interesting coalescence and so here we are today. There's still some questions out and about. Maybe these will get cleared up a little bit today about what kind of relief there is for businesses and homeowners in terms of loans and loss recovery. What's clear that from what I understand of today's session is that this will be talking about public assistance and how public assistance benefits our governmental entities as well as not-for-profit entities. So I'm certain that'll be gone over. And I do want folks to understand and hopefully support, this is not just a short-term storm disaster recovery. Hopefully we recognize that we need to have a long-term view with whatever dollars we're spending. The Cold River, the Ashwillet River, the Kentucky Rivers, and the Connecticut, they don't know state or town boundaries. What happens in one town affects other towns, and hopefully we can make gains for Western New Hampshire with the funding that is likely to be available both from the disaster relief and through government allocations. So I know I'll be working with Senator Representative Ahrens and others who care deeply about the impacts of these storms and how we are able to respond and build some resilience into our future storm conditions that we're no doubt going to face. So with that, I'll thank you again, Jen Harper, for this being a constantly available to those who have had questions about the process and your leadership during this, and turn this meeting over to you. And then we'll come back around to a couple of the other agencies that are on the Zoom call, and we'll have a demonstration of the geodatabase, and also hear from the Department of Transportation.
Great, thank you very much, Senator, I appreciate it. I'd like to take credit for the 2 declarations coming within 20 days, but have zero to do with that. It is totally unprecedented that the turnaround was this quick. So I don't know what happened, but the stars aligned and your meeting date and this date and the 2 declarations coming together just all miraculously happened at the same time. So we're gonna talk about the 2 declarations. So the first one is for the Cheshire County, July 17, 19. And the second one is for Cheshire and Sullivan County for the period of July 29 and 30. Caveat with the second storm is that we had asked FEMA to approve the period of damages July 29 through August 2nd. The August 1 and 2 primarily impacts just DOT and natural and cultural resources. We made a justification working with the National Weather Service and our state partners to show that we believe the 2 storms are connected. FEMA right now has said no, so we will be appealing that. And we are still waiting for the paperwork to come from FEMA outlining what in particular they disagree with. So we'll tackle that when we get that paperwork. So today, I'm going to turn it over to Fallon Reed, who is the Chief of Planning, Mitigation, and Recovery, to do what we call an applicant briefing. This lays out the process that will have to be followed in order for communities, state agencies, and private nonprofits to quote unquote apply to be part of the recovery process. So when I say apply, it's pretty much just a one pager. Fallon will explain that, but we got the declarations. Now comes the hard work. So we'll explain all that and answer any questions. So Fallon.
Sure, thanks, Director. Just give me 1 second while I share my screen.
Will these packets be available through you?
Yeah, so for folks that are here in person, we have a variety of packets with information about the program. And then for those of you that are online, this information will be on our website a little bit, probably tomorrow by the time we get back to the office. And we'll make it available so everyone has it. There's copies of the PowerPoint, a variety of other reference sheets and things like that. So we'll have them on our website shortly, and then you all have them here as well. So as the director said, we're doing an applicant briefing for DR 4622, which is the July 17th through 19th storm, and DR 4624, which is July 29th through 30. So the applicant briefing, what I will tell you right now is there's a lot of information in these slides. It's more of a reference material. The program, while this is recovery based, it is a federal grant program. So there's a lot of guidance and rules and requirements that go along with it. So we tried to put all of this in the applicant briefing. So you have it as reference later on in the PowerPoint. So today we'll go over the public assistance program. We'll describe the process, try to answer general eligibility questions with the caveat that specific eligibility questions must be answered by FEMA during project development. And as I mentioned, this is reference material for the program. Just quickly, the things we'll talk about today is the major disasters that were declared, explanation of the PA program, discuss eligibility, how to apply for the program, project considerations, next steps, and then opportunity for question and answer at the end. So for 4622, which is the first storm, the incident period is July 17th through 19th due to severe storms and flooding. We received the declaration on September 30th. The counties for this disaster that are declared is Cheshire County only. And then it also opens up hazard mitigation, grant funding statewide, which I'll go over in just a little bit. For 4624, the incident period is July 29th through 30th with the caveat that the director went over that we'll be appealing August 1 and 2. We received the declaration on October 4th, and this opens up public assistance for Cheshire and Sullivan counties for damages that occurred within that time period. And again, hazard mitigation statewide. So the public assistance program broadly is, assists in the restoration of the community infrastructure. It's supplemental funding and has very specific eligibility requirements. The FEMA share of eligible costs is awarded to the state, and then we disperse that to the individual applicants, the communities. It's a 75-25 cost share. There are a number of authorities, statutes, and regulations that manage this program or rule this program. First of all is the Stafford Act, which outlines a lot of the program. The two Code of Federal Regulations, the 2 CFR and 44 CFR. And then the PAPA G, which is the Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide. So all of these establish the framework for the program and the rules and requirements that go along with it. Just a handful of definitions as we go through. So public assistance we refer to as PA. The grant recipient is the state of New Hampshire. The applicant is the entity applying for the grant. And then once the grant's awarded, the applicant becomes a subrecipient. As I mentioned, the PAPA-G is the Public Assistance Program and Policy Guide. A PNP is a private nonprofit. We'll talk about PDMGs, which are our program delivery managers, and then the CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulations. So this process, we call this our disaster snake. So this outlines the process from when the disaster occurs to when it closes out. So we've had the disaster occur. We have our initial damage assessment, which you all participated in to get us our initial numbers. And then we had FEMA come out and assist with our joint preliminary damage to do a bit of validation there. The governor requests the presidential disaster declaration, which has to have or be submitted within 30 days of the disaster, which we had asked for an extension. The president declares the declaration or declares the disaster. And then, like I said, it opens up public assistance and hazard mitigation grant program for this. And then today we're at the applicant briefing stage. So we'll go over all of this information. The next step from here would be to submit a request for public assistance, which, as the director mentioned, is a one-page application that the community submits, basically saying, yes, we want to pursue public assistance. We'll schedule exploratory calls or discovery scoping meetings. We'll go through project formulation, determine eligibility, and then review and sign off, and then the grants get awarded, and then there's closeout after that, which on the snake seems very simple, but as a federal grant program, there's a lot of details and requirements that go with this. So public assistance is basically there's 4 eligibility requirements to participate. So your applicant, facility, work, and cost. The applicant is the basis for eligibility. So the applicant must be eligible in order for the facility to be eligible. The facility must be eligible for the work to be eligible, and then the work must be eligible for the cost. So it's a pyramid of eligibility that we work through. When we're looking at applicants, there are 4 types of applicants that are eligible in the public assistance program: state government agencies, local governments and special districts, private nonprofits that provide a critical or essential service, or federally recognized Native American tribes, which we don't have any in New Hampshire. For private nonprofits to be eligible for public assistance funding, they have to meet a couple of requirements. First of all, provide critical or essential government type services, be a tax exempt nonprofit, and then non-critical PNPs must provide services to the general public. It can't be for just a specific group or neighborhood or something like that. Critical services are those that provide essential services to a community's viability, and the non-critical essential services provide other essential government type services to the community. So our critical services are those that are own or operate facilities that provide critical services such as education, utility, medical, emergency services, fire, ambulance rescue, that type critical service. Non-critical essential services are only eligible for emergency work, and for any permanent work, they have to go through the SBA for disaster loan. If the PNP is denied the SBA loan, FEMA may fund repairs for the permanent work, but the types of facilities are houses of worship, community centers, homeless shelters, rehabilitation facilities, things like that.
Could we ask a question?
Absolutely, please.
Relative to the PNP, nonprofits.
Yep.
If they had flooding in a basement, would that qualify?
So it depends on the type of work that they would need. So there's, and I'll get into this a little bit, but there's 2 lanes for work. You have your emergency work, which is debris removal and emergency protective measures. And then you have your permanent work. So your permanent work would be infrastructure repairs, things like that. So if the PNP needed assistance with like a muck out or something like that, then that's likely emergency work. It's not any permanent repairs, but if we're looking at permanent repairs to the facility, that may be permanent work, and it depends on the type of PNP. So if it's a nonprofit, fire station, or an ambulance service, so we have some that are not municipal run, that yes, but if it's a community center, then it's likely the emergency work, then we'd have to look at SBA's for permanent. So unfortunately, it's not cut or dry. There's a little bit more detail that we would need to know about the damages that occurred. But what I would say is have the PNP submit the request for public assistance, and then my team, along with Will and his team at FEMA, will work through those specifics with the applicant, and then we'll be able to go through there. Yes, ma'am.
So for example, we have the Aqua Village store, which is the building is owned by the Historical Society.
Okay.
The entire basement was furnished to the water.
Okay.
And they had to replace their furnace.
Okay.
So of course they spent time and money to empty out the basement.
Sure.
Put it all out, and then money for. So. Or something like that.
Potentially. What was the facility again?
It's the Aqua Village store.
Okay.
The building is owned by the Aqua Historical Society. The Aqua project that actually runs the village store. It's a nonprofit. It's a New Hampshire nonprofit, but it's not a 501c3.
Okay. So what I would suggest, and certainly will correct me if I'm wrong here, but have them submit the request for public assistance, and then we can go through the specifics and see if they're eligible. Unfortunately, we'll need more information to kind of deem that, but I would say definitely have them come to the table, and then we'll be able to go down that road with them.
So that's this form in here.
Yep. And PNPs have a little bit extra that they need to do, and I'll go over that in a little bit, but we can certainly even reach out to them and help them fill out the paperwork.
And
if
they
that's-
only have 30 days to do that.
So just to fill out the form, the request for public assistance. Yep. Yeah.
So we'll have to make those available at our town hall for the church and.
Yeah.
Or
and
other places.
Once we go through, I think we might be able to answer some of the other questions, and then no, it's okay. And then we'll have all of the paperwork available, and certainly can either hand fill them out or online or whatever, but yeah, we'll be able to work with them. Sure.
So long as we broke in, I want to recognize Councilor Cindy Worthington,
Sure.
who's joined us today.
Did you get a handout now? Okay, perfect.
Could I just interrupt real quick? Would everyone on the call please mute? We are getting some background noise here. So please check your microphone is muted. Thank you.
So for facility eligibility, the facility, I just caught up on my notes here. I'm not necessarily just four-walled buildings, but it could be roads, parks, things like that. They have criteria that they need to meet as well, so that the facility is the legal responsibility of an eligible applicant, is in active use at the time of the disaster, was damaged as a result of the disaster, and then located within the disaster area. And then once we determine facility eligibility, we'll look at the work. And so at a minimum, work must meet 3 general criteria: be required as a result of the incident, be located within the designated disaster area, and be the legal responsibility of an eligible applicant. General work kind of criteria: FEMA does not provide funding for repair of damage caused by deterioration, deferred maintenance, or failure to take measures to protect the facility from further damage or negligence. So those we'll review as well. So as I was mentioning before, there are 7 different work categories. Category A and B are under the umbrella of emergency work, which addresses an immediate need. So that's debris removal and emergency protective measures. Permanent work is that restores an eligible facility and things of roads and bridges, water control facilities, buildings and equipment, utilities, parks, recreation, and others. So when we look at emergency work, for category A, debris removal. So debris removal activities are eligible if it's in the public interest based on whether the work either eliminates threats to lives, public health and safety, eliminates immediate threats of significant damage to improve public or private property, and ensures economic recovery of the affected community to benefit the community at large. So debris includes things like vegetative debris, construction and demolition debris, sand, mud, silt, rocks, things like that. There is an option for an alternative procedure when it comes to debris removal. So typically with public assistance, when we look at force account labor, only the overtime is available for reimbursement, not your straight time or regular budgeted time. However, there's an alternative procedure option for debris removal where force account labor is eligible for reimbursement here. So the applicant may elect to participate in this, but essentially it allows for your straight time and overtime to be reimbursed under this. So this is a fairly recent change in the last couple of years. DOT takes advantage of this quite a bit so that their regular and straight time, or I'm sorry, regular and overtime are eligible for debris removal. Also under emergency work is category B, which is emergency protective measures. So these are actions taken by an applicant before, during, and after a disaster that is intended to eliminate or lessen immediate threats to lives, public health or safety, or significant additional damage to improved public or private property. So here are some examples of emergency protective measures. The biggest thing in the case of these two disasters, EOC related costs, emergency access, search and rescue, evacuation and sheltering, flood fighting, all the things that you kind of do in the beginning stages of the disaster, dissemination of information to the public, search and rescue. I think I actually already said that. So those are kind of those immediate emergency protective measures that we look at. And also that would fall under here, just find the specific language. So when we look at we talked yesterday a bit about emergency access, opening roads to just get them passable versus the permanent work to repair them back to where they were. The emergency access is the emergency protective measures, so it fall under a little bit different category. Emergency protective measures to protect improved property. So this would be constructing emergency berms, emergency repairs to prevent further damage, emergency slope stabilization, mold remediation, things like that. So I mentioned emergency access. So when an incident causes damage or debris blockage to access routes to an essential community service or community with survivors, clearing the debris from the facility or conducting emergency repairs, that's the emergency work under here. And it's limited to necessary for access to remain passable. So we're not talking about, improving or making things better, but just getting them open so we get back to emergency services. Typically, privately owned things are not eligible under public assistance. However, if the community or the municipality needs to do emergency access repairs to a privately owned roads, they're potentially eligible when a couple conditions are met. There's no other access point. It eliminates the need for temporary housing, and that the applicant completes all legal processes and obtains rights of entry and things like that for the work. So when we transition over to permanent work, categories C through G. So this is restoring to pre-disaster design, size and capacity, and function in accordance with codes and standards, must be required as a result of the disaster, and should include hazard mitigation measures when possible. So one thing I want to mention, when we did the preliminary damage assessment, FEMA came out to look at what it would cost to, or the damage cost to open things back up to pre-disaster. Did not take into account any mitigation or improvements or anything like that. But that's where we do that through this process. So when we look at each project, we'll look at ways to potentially improve it. If there's effective hazard mitigation we can do, we'll look at all of those kind of pieces when we go through that, and I'll go through that a little bit more in detail. There are a couple of factors that impact permanent work projects. So there's special considerations, capped projects, and then some pilot programs or alternative procedures. So one of the big things with permanent work is environmental and historic preservation. So there are a number of statutes, executive orders, and regulations that fall around environmental protection and to preserve the nation's historic resources. So we need to make every effort to allow FEMA the opportunity to perform EHP reviews before starting any work. And again, this is for permanent work, not our emergency access or emergency protective measures. So when we go to do permanent work restoration, FEMA will ask that a EHP review is done and look through everything. If the applicant starts the work prior to an EHP review, there is a potential to jeopardize the funding for the entire project. FEMA will likely consult with federal partners, our state partners, and any other government resources before the work begins. And then the applicant's responsible for complying with all applicable federal and state laws when it comes to the work. So insurance comes into play if they're in two ways. So one is if there's any actual or anticipated insurance proceeds for the damages that will be deducted from the eligible project costs for facilities that are insured. And then applicants that receive PA funding for permanent work must obtain and maintain insurance to protect the facility against future loss. So certainly these are facilities that can get insurance. We can't necessarily insure a road or a bridge, but building things like that. If the applicant doesn't maintain the required insurance from a previous disaster, and then the damage gets, or the facility gets damaged in a future disaster, the facility is essentially ineligible for future funding. And then certainly if facilities are within a special flood hazard area that are not covered by flood insurance, the assistance will be reduced by the maximum flood insurance proceeds that would have been payable had it been insured. Floodplain management. So any project within or affecting the floodplain must be reviewed to make sure that it meets the executive orders on floodplain management and protection of wetlands. So one thing I wanted to chat about was hazard mitigation. So with hazard mitigation, there are two lanes. We have our what's referred to as 406 mitigation, the PA mitigation that comes section 406 of the Stafford Act. So this is mitigation of incident caused damages. So anything that was damaged through the disaster that is deemed to be an eligible facility and work, we'll look at mitigation efforts through this process. So damage, this is where it comes under public assistance. There isn't necessarily a cap. We look at all of the damages, and then the other piece of mitigation is 404 mitigation, which is hazard mitigation grant program. So when we receive a disaster declaration, we also request hazard mitigation grant program funding. When we request that, what happens is FEMA takes the amount of the disaster and gives us anywhere from 15 to 20% additional funding for hazard mitigation funding. So this can be for damaged or non-damaged facilities. It's competitive statewide, but the first lane for the damages from this disaster will be PA mitigation. And then if for some reason it's not eligible under PA mitigation, we'll look at and potentially utilize a hazard mitigation grant program. So within our office, the public assistance staff, Jamie, Jen O'Leary, Vanessa, myself, manage the 406 mitigation. And then the 404 mitigation is Brian, who's our state hazard mitigation officer, who's here as well. So the PA hazard mitigation looks at cost-effective measures that reduce or eliminate potential for similar damages in the future. So for example, in Tropical Storm Irene in 2011, the Loon Mountain Bridge was damaged significantly. And they took that bridge and we did 406 hazard mitigation and rebuilt that whole area to prevent the flooding from occurring, which, knock on wood, has not had any issues since the bridge was repaired. When we look at public assistance hazard mitigation, we look at cost effectiveness by one of three methods. So we have our 15% rule. So that's where if the mitigation measure does not exceed 15% of the total eligible repair costs of the facility, then it's deemed cost effective. We also have the 100% rule under Appendix J of the Papa G. So in Appendix J, there is a variety of different mitigation measures that are listed that FEMA has determined to be cost effective, and that it does, as long as the cost does not exceed 100% of the eligible repair costs. Things that are in there that come to mind quickly are culverts. Generally, the mitigation work towards culverts, as long as it's not more than 100% of the cost to repair, we can do hazard mitigation there, upsizing, things like that. And then the third option, if the mitigation efforts don't fall into either, is doing a benefit cost analysis. So basically, for the benefit cost analysis, we look at the total estimated cost for the mitigation measure and compare it to the total value of expected benefits to society. So the things they look at are the magnitude and frequency of the damage to facility, the need for emergency protective measures, the need for temporary facilities, potential casualties, and then previous impacts to that program or to that facility. So there's a variety of ways that we can look at hazard mitigation and improvement of the facilities. The hazard mitigation grant program, the 404 mitigation, this funding is separate from what will be under the PA program. We will receive an additional 15%, and then the applications and funding is competitive statewide. So yesterday, Brian sent out to our emergency management directors in the state a summary requesting letters of intent. We are looking for those to be submitted to us by December 7th. Requirement along with this funding is that the municipalities, the applicants must have a formally approved local hazard mitigation plan at the time of the obligation of the funding, and that the project must be consistent within the plan's goals and objectives. So once we get the letters of intent in, we'll review them for their general eligibility, and then we'll send out application packages for folks to fill out. And then within the packet, and we'll make this available online, are a variety of potential eligible activities. So one other piece that can impact projects are CAP projects. So there's three options that FEMA goes over or provides for flexibility for applicants to use public assistance funding differently than just restoring the pre-disaster design. So we have alternative procedures, improved projects, and alternate projects. So for alternative procedures, under section 428, this applies to permanent work, large projects only, and they can use funds across all permanent work projects and basically accept a fixed cost estimate. It consolidates your subawards, and then you could use that towards something different rather than going back to pre-design. These next couple items that I'll talk about are pretty rare for us to use in New Hampshire, but are options within the program for large enough projects.
Just to understand this 15% add-on.
Yep.
If you've got a culvert and it needs bridge support, or some concrete improvement to upgrade it to handle whatever the water flow, is that part of the 15%?
Was it damaged as part of one of these two storms? In theory, I mean, hypothetically,
If
if it was damaged,
if it was a source of the damage to the road and needs to be improved for prevent that from occurring again.
Sure. So if the culvert itself was damaged and part of the projects that we'll look at, then we would look at the PA mitigation for improving that. If this culvert was not damaged, but it's on a list of things in your mitigation plan that you want to improve upon, then we would utilize the 404 mitigation for that. Bottom line is my staff are very well educated in this. And if folks have specific concerns or projects, they'll be able to address those specific and kind of guide you in the right path. If basically all we need is the community to say, we need assistance or we want to look at mitigation with this. And then my folks will kind of look at the project and say, yes, let's go down this path, or no, let's go down this path.
In this calculation, we've got a disaster for 17 through 19, that's $2.3 million. Is it 15% on that 2.3 or 15% on all the projects that are going to be submitted?
Great question. So Brian, correct me if I speak outside of this, but what will happen is we'll get our initial 15% kind of gauge based off of our preliminary damage assessment. And then at 6 months and then at 12 months, we'll get additional updates on our numbers based on how many projects have been submitted. So after about a year, that's when we get our final lock-in of management or of hazard mitigation money. So they kind of give us an initial based off the 2 million, the 15%, this is what we're thinking. But then you have about a year or so to get all your projects, and then they'll give you an updated what number in the 15%. Brian, is that right? Okay.
So this is where town reserves or loan money needs to backfill or to front load an improvement if it's necessary immediately, and then you get reimbursed.
So if it's damaged and needs to be fixed immediately, this is where we have our emergency protective measures as part of the disaster. If it's not damaged and it's just something on the list of projects that the community wants to do over the course of time, they can't start the work until they've received the award from. So there's kind of two different paths, and it really depends if it was damaged as part of the disaster or if not. If it's damaged as part of the disaster and we need to do emergency repairs, don't wait, do the emergency repairs in accordance with, you know, your procurement and everything else in your community. If it's not damaged, then we have a little bit of time and we'll work through the application process and get awarded to do the long-term work. So the big difference is whether it's already damaged or if it's not, and that's kind of the timeline and the path that we work off of.
And if the estimate on the project is $100,000, the ultimate funding on that would be 75% of that.
Right, for both public assistance and hazard mitigation grant program, it's a 75-25 cost share. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So I know that FEMA completed their PA estimates for second, July 29, August 2nd.
Yep.
And, you know, all variety of towns had a damage amount, PA amount.
Sure.
And certainly, when you look at that, I'm looking at the numbers for Africa, but obviously for us, like the numbers close to what we're looking at in terms of cost.
Sure.
So when we come to do these projects and the costs go above what this threshold is that's okay?
Absolutely. So the PDAs are just the initial assessment to give us over the 2 million and some change. So every state has a threshold that they need to meet to say to the president, we need federal assistance. Ours is 2 million and some change. So we exceeded that for both disasters. When we come back and go through all these projects, I wouldn't be surprised, and not taking Ackworth into account, looking at the other communities, if we double, if not triple that amount based on the repairs, but then also any potential mitigation. And there is no problem with that as long as the federal disaster relief fund doesn't run out of money, we're good. So, but yeah, there's no problem. But that's just the initial, kind of like if you get in a fender bender, right? And they give you an initial assessment of what they think, but then when the mechanic gets in and under and realizes you bent your frame and it's way more and all of that, kind of the same thing. This is just our initial assessment of what we think, but then that's why we go into all of the projects and everything else and get really down to the penny of what is actually going back to the community. Sure. All right, I'm just gonna skip through a couple of these. Yeah.
Just for clarity's sake, because I know there's probably others here too, but this is a type of emails and texts that we receive, and I received it this morning, actually. Cheshire County Funds, hi Chris, I see that Biden approved for the Cheshire County rainstorm. I live on a hill, and yet my basement flooded, which is costing thousands of dollars to repair. Do you know if individual homeowners can apply for some of this government funding? If so, do you know who I would contact to apply? And from what I'm hearing, no.
Right, so good point. The disaster declaration was for public assistance, which is for government entities and private nonprofits. We did not have enough damage in the state to meet the indicator for individual assistance, which is businesses and homeowners. So the options are limited for the individual person. SBA does have loans available for private nonprofits. It's part of kind of what I talked about, that depending on the type of damage and the type of PNP, you'll have to go to SBA first. But unfortunately, the individual homeowner and business are not eligible for this disaster. So they would have to go through insurance or other avenues, but we don't have any federal assistance, nor do we have state funding to assist them either.
You only have the gap funding for the town in that middle area, right?
I'm not sure what you mean.
I thought the state had its own gap funding. No?
So we have a very small,
Did they use it?
so we had, Governor Lynch had established a, I forget what it's titled, but there was some funding for individuals that were uninsured or underinsured, low to moderate income, and be able to assist with some of that. However, there's no money in that fund. I think there's less than $20,000, somewhere around there right now. And there's not a significant amount of money. We have several cases in our office that we're working through to see if we're able to assist them, but.
So the options are for individuals that had losses, if they are low to moderate income, they can work with the community action programs. They can work with the local Red Cross folks. And maybe some potential programs at Health and Human Services. But if they are, in that, just above that threshold to low to moderate income, and they don't have insurance
Or underinsured.
or underinsured, there is not a provision within the state of New Hampshire that there's a pot of money to help these folks, unfortunately. We have worked with communities in their welfare offices, sometimes can help individuals. There are voluntary organizations active in disasters, like the Mennonites, the Team Rubicons, those types of volunteer organizations that have historically come into New Hampshire to help during large disasters. So you may have heard the term, muck out. So if mud, water, etc., comes into a person's basement, Catholic Charities, the Team Rubicons, the Mennonites, etc., could have a team that would come in during these larger disasters where many homes have been damaged, and help them to take out the mud, cut the sheetrock, and help them to repair that. But other than those voluntary groups, there's really not a good answer for those people like you just mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Would you be able to send out an email or a sheet with some for the low and moderate income folks, what are resources they can contact for that?
Yeah, definitely. The first step for them would be to call 211. And then we have, we work with 211 and they have their referral and we have, they go to our case manager. But yes, we have some information we can send out as well.
Okay, I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Sure. All right. So the next piece of eligibility, top of the pyramid, is cost eligibility. So this is where it's pretty easy to determine applicant facility work eligibility, but when we get into cost, that's where it gets into super details and can be muddy at best. So must be tied to the performance of eligible work, documented, reduced by all potential credits, authorized and not prohibited under federal, state, or local laws and regulations, consistent with the applicant's internal policies and regulations, and necessary and reasonable. So reasonable costs. I know there was some concern, post-COVID, everything seems to be inflated in costs and whatnot, and FEMA takes into consideration if the cost, comparable to current market prices. They look at historic documentation, average costs in the area, and then also published costs from national databases. Procurement standards, this is a big one. All applicants must comply with federal procurement standards in 2 CFR 200. State applicants must follow the same policies as we would for non-federal funds. And then non-state applicants are local governments and private nonprofits must use their own documented procurement procedures that reflect applicable state, local government laws, regulations, and 2 CFR 200. Lots of information about procurement and contracting. It's pretty detailed in the packet, but basically they have to comply with the procedures, applicable government laws and regulations, and then applicable federal laws and regulations. Big things for federal.
These are all things that, this is what your agency helps guide people through.
Yes, and this is where, I don't have a percentage, but this is where a majority of our projects get hung up on, is the cost piece and procurement and things like that. Because that's where FEMA comes down and, these details that we need to make sure happen.
But a town unfamiliar with.
Yes, we will
these,
work with them.
You.
Yeah, and then
you help
also
put
the
together
partners from
bid
FEMA as well.
documents that are.
Yeah, and we also have procurement training that FEMA does. I think we actually just did a class, and we can do more, but yeah, that's it. Representative.
Thank you. So what happens in the situation where we find ourselves now with COVID, that there is maybe any one contractor that you can turn to, because everybody's so busy doing something else that you can't really adhere to them.
Sure. So if big things are, putting out to bid and doing those sort of things. If you only have one or two that come back, and that's what you decide to go through, it is what it is. If you just have one person, but we have to demonstrate that we went through, for proper procedures to do that. So, yeah. And we can certainly schedule another procurement training that I think will help folks kind of get through this. So there's a variety of procurement methods, micro purchases, small purchases, sealed bids, competitive proposal, non-competitive sole sourcing, and they all have kind of guidelines and things along with that. Contracts, FEMA reimburses based on 3 types of contracts: fixed price, cost reimbursement, and to a very limited extent, time and materials. FEMA does not reimburse under cost plus percentage of cost contract or a contract with percentage of construction cost method. There are a variety of clauses that are required to be in the contracts for FEMA. Biggest thing is determination for convenience and a variety of others. But that's something that we've had to address throughout COVID with contracts. Is FEMA isn't big on contract for 5 years when we're talking about emergency work restoration. So we'll work with everyone on all that.
Can I just
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to follow up on the procurement thing. So one of the things that we have encouraged communities to do over the last number of disasters that we've had is a town may not have a procurement policy, or they may just have a small one and think that they're good, but if there's any questions that anybody has on their procurement policy, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's in compliance with 2 CFR 200. So if you have any questions, just let us know. We'll work with you. We'll work with FEMA.
Are prevailing wage rates required? Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what was that question?
The use of prevailing wages, Davis-Bacon wages.
It's also important when you talk about purchasing regs, that the town has a emergency purchasing policy. Because if their policy, for example, says we get 3 bids for $10,000 or more, if the town does not follow that as part of the emergency, FEMA will deny it if you did not follow that policy. So normally we recommend that towns also have an emergency clause that says that during emergencies, we're not going to follow these rules. We're going to do it this way. So that's just something, again, we try to work with our public works communities to remind them on their select boards that they have those things in place and documented before the emergencies.
And to tackle on what Court said, the emergency and exigent procurement also has its limits, so it's not for months after the fact or, the whole process. If in the beginning you have to do an emergency contract for certain things, yes, but when we get some time out, then there's not really justification for that emergency procedures. So thank you, Court. Donated resources. So if you have any donated resources, labor, equipment, materials, things like that, that can offset your cost share. So FEMA won't reimburse for that, but they'll adjust your cost share, your 25% based on that. So there's a whole piece we'll go through the donated resources. And then one other piece that I wanted to discuss is management costs. So when you have your disaster, you'll get reimbursed for the work and the cost to repair everything. However, there's also administrative costs for the management of the grant that is eligible as well. So managing the grant, seeking reimbursement, that's your management costs. Costs incurred to do the project, complete the work, those are your project costs. But management costs, up to 5% of the total project or all your costs can be eligible for management costs. It's actual costs incurred, no excess funds, and that is 100% federal share. So there's no cost share for the subrecipient. Things that are eligible: indirect costs, direct administrative costs, other administrative expenses associated with the disaster, things like that. So for our office, we utilize management costs to pay for the staff that are managing the grant, and then supplies and equipment, computers, printers, things like that. So applicants have up to 5% that they can use for management costs. Folks' time, like I said, equipment, material, things like that, that are in the grant management side of the house. And we'll go through all of these with the applicants as well.
You need to recover your costs.
Right.
Does that take 5%?
It depends.
It's a part of the 5%.
Right. So, so like your time today, for those of you from the communities going to applicant briefings, you track your time that can be associated as the management cost because it's part of managing the disaster. So, Court and his team will record their time of the 2 hours spent here. And then when they do have the projects for management costs, and then they'll get reimbursed that amount. But if you were to hire someone, say to work on this disaster, part-time, what have you, that could be paid out of management costs if the work they do is just on the disaster. So things that are, potentially eligible, like I said, applicant briefings, the meetings that we have, preparing correspondence files, all of that, preparing, reviewing project worksheets, travel expenses, training, all of that. Basically, what we ask is everyone to track all their time and expenses, and then we can work on the eligibility and reimbursement for that piece of it.
So that's why we say when, on July 17th, when it was raining, we tell the community, start documenting your expenses. Everything that's associated with, if we were to get a presidential disaster declaration, has a potential of being reimbursed.
And push that, is the local reimbursement receive the reimbursement for state services?
So we get the money to the state first, and then we disperse it to the locals. But that is quickly, within a couple of days, is turned right around. So once you have a project awarded and it goes to FEMA and they award it to us, we turn that right around with just a couple of days, and then it's a direct deposit right into the town's account.
And so there are a lot of projects that are gonna be $100,000.
Sure.
Might be less, that's 5% is $5,000 or less.
Mhm.
And so there's not a lot of assistance with that. I mean, it's great to begin to document it, In any case, with your experiences, the towns have been receiving the bulk of those dollars if they've documented their expenses.
Yeah, if they documented, they'll get reimbursed down to the penny, up to that 5%. Yeah.
Okay, great.
This change in management costs is the recent change, just the last couple of years. Before it was administrative costs and it was very complicated. This is pretty straightforward when it comes to management costs, administration and reimbursement.
We have a question online from Joe Kenny. Once a project has been awarded, how long can the project remain open and still receive reimbursement?
So good question. And if I have that kind of in a little bit of a slide, and I'll be able to explain that in just a minute, if that's okay. So the next step for today is request for public assistance. So applicants have 30 days of the declaration date to submit that, 1 or 2 pager. We can also do it online. We have the link for that. For the first disaster, we need that by October 26th to our office. And for the second disaster, we're looking for it by November 1st. That gives our office a couple of days to do some administrative work on our end to approve it and then submit to FEMA. And basically, any entity, potentially eligible entity that would like to participate must submit the form. There is no harm in submitting the form and then finding out that they're not an eligible entity or an eligible applicant. We'll just work with them on that, but it's, for some reason, the Historical Society ends up not being eligible. There's no harm, no foul with them submitting the form, and we work through that eligibility criteria with them. The problem we run into is if we get past the 30 days and someone realizes, oh, we never submitted anything, then we're kind of between a rock and a hard place with FEMA. They're pretty hard and fast on those 30 days unless there was extension, emergency circumstances that we would need to ask for an extension, but we have no reason for that right now. The next step then would be assigning a program delivery manager and setting up an exploratory call. So our exploratory calls, once we have a program manager assigned, which will be one of my folks, we'll do a conference call, or probably a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, kind of introduce folks, talk about the damages at a high level, and then schedule a recovery scoping meeting. The recovery scoping meeting is that first big meeting where we go through the damages, talk about potential projects, how we might group things together, any sort of EHP compliance that we may need to look at, potential hazard mitigation opportunities, all of that. The RS, that recovery scoping meeting, is that first big meeting where we kind of get into the weeds of what we'll have for projects and start going through that process.
The question on the chat is, can this form be emailed to all eligible towns?
Yes, so it can be, and it's also on our website, which I can show everyone in just a minute. Yep. Then we go into our project formulation. We have our damage inventory, which is essentially just an Excel sheet of list of every damage that folks have. Many applicants already have this because from the preliminary damage assessment. So we'll just build off of that, but this is the opportunity to identify any and all possible damages. And then we'll look at eligibility later. We'll do a project formulation for work that needs to be completed. We'll do site inspections, look at our incident-related damage and work, basically look at the who, what, where, why, and how much of the damage is. Talked about identifying, we'll develop a scope of work, project costs, all of that. Grant portal is the online system we use with FEMA to manage this, which folks will have access to and can track the process. So one thing I wanted to talk about is our minimum project thresholds. So unfortunately, both disasters were not declared on the same day, and that would have made our lives a little bit easier. But because the federal fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th, there's a slight difference between the two disasters. So there's a minimum project threshold that a community has to have at least, and we'll start with the first disaster, July 17th through 19th, damages of at least $3,320 for to be eligible. Under that, there's not enough damages for the work. Ackworth, I think you don't have a problem here. You'll be well over that.
This is the total, not the reimbursable amount.
Right.
On 3320, it would be, the reimbursable would be 75% of that.
Right. Right. Yep.
So if there's a small damage on a road,
Well, I'm thinking the Historical Society, if they
Yeah.
become an eligible applicant and they have less than
3,500.
they would be 3,500 next disaster. It wouldn't necessarily be eligible, but we'll work through all of that because likely there are costs or things that they haven't thought about that might be eligible. So don't let that number scare you, but just know that that's kind of our minimum. They have to have at least as much damage to be eligible for that. And then for the second storm, because it was declared after the start of the federal fiscal year, when they adjusted the numbers, it's $3,500. So FEMA also has it, they distinguish between a small versus a large project. So a small project is that $3,320 to $132,800. Basically, when you're a small project, if you don't have the exact cost and everything, they'll work on the best estimate and are reimbursed for that amount. And then if it's under or over, unless it's significantly over, then we would review it again. But the small project basically is less paperwork to have to do. Somewhere in some office deemed this is the number that it's not worth the amount of staff and work to go down to the penny. Now, if you're over, if the particular project is over this amount, it's reimbursed down to the penny. We have to look at all the expenses, receipts, everything. But if it's between the 3,300 and 132, it's considered a small project. And we'll go into those details, but those are kind of the brackets we're looking at for costs. So small projects, it's made at the time of the approval based on an estimate or actual costs if they're known. They don't reconcile the costs with project completion. Large projects is reconciled based on actual costs. So going back to what Councilor Kenny was saying, that for the time frame, so if you have a small project, say something that's $50,000 for repair, they will, based on what the estimate is or the actual cost, FEMA will reimburse on that amount, and it is what it is at that point. For large projects, we'll look at if it's work to be completed, which most of them are. They'll look at the estimate, and then we'll reimburse periodically as we go through and submit invoices and down to the penny. The other piece which ties into this is there's deadlines for work to be completed. So this is right out of the book. no adjustments for extensions or anything like that. But emergency work, so category A and B, the debris removal and emergency protective measures, must be completed within 6 months of the disaster declaration date. Permanent work is 18 months, so we have an additional year on top of that. Now, again, this is just right here. If we need to, we can request extensions. We can request an extension or do an additional 6 months for emergency work and up to 30 months for permanent work. If we need to go beyond that, we would have to go to FEMA. Case in point, Irene 4026, it was 2011, and we didn't finish the project work until about 2018 because of the bridge. It took so long with everything. So we do have the ability for large projects to ask for extensions, but initially this is, we look at 6 months and 18 months. So I'm hoping, Councilor Kenny, that answered your question, but if I need to clarify anything, please let me know.
Thumbs up.
Okay, perfect. Documentation, maintaining all the source documentation. You have to keep all the financial and program documentation for 3 years after the disaster is closed out. And then they're certainly subject to audit by state auditors, FEMA, and then OIG and GAO. This sheet's in your packet and will be made available online. It's kind of our interpretation of the process, how it's broken down, the different categories. Our operational planning is kind of where we're at right now. We'll go through, determine eligibility, applicant eligibility, identify damages. Then we go into our damage intake and eligibility analysis. So FEMA does a lot of this work here. Once we do everything here, the scoping and costing goes to another section within FEMA, which is called the CRC, which is the Consolidated Resource Center. It's been a while since I've had to use the full acronym. And they basically do QA, check for an additional mitigation or EHP, and then we get into obligation. So our FEMA folks will get it back, sign off on it, we'll get it, sign off on it, and the applicant has an opportunity to sign off on it as well. FEMA awards the money to the state. I have a block on here for GNC and fiscal, but we actually will do that much earlier, consecutively as things are going through, so we don't have to wait for GNC and fiscal to approve before we can award. We'll basically go months before and say, this is what we anticipate the money to be, and we'll award it appropriately. Then we send out the award, and then we have our grant closeout process. There is an opportunity for expedited funding, and this is for emergency work that meet or exceed the large project thresholds. We can do estimated costs. It is limited to certain operational periods. It's only awarded at 50% and then awarded at the 75% of that. So there's an option for the expedited funding there. Grant portal, as I mentioned, is online. We'll go through training and how to use all of that. And timelines and deadlines. As I mentioned, the request for public assistance need to be submitted to our office by October 26th for the first disaster, November 1st for the second disaster. Once we have our recovery scoping meeting, applicants have an additional 60 days to make sure all their damages are submitted. And then if we need to appeal for anything, you have 60 days to appeal any decisions.
Question from chat. What if the work has already been done to repair the damaged structures and roads?
So that's actually a little bit easier than work to be completed. So work that has been completed, FEMA will review, and that tends to be awarded faster because you're able to showcase everything. You have your invoice and whatnot, but it's just, that's where the cost piece of it and making sure things were done in compliance with your procurement or state rules or local rules. So there's two different tracks. You have a kind of fast track for work that's already been completed, and then the longer track for work to be completed. So it's not a problem, just a little bit different review and reconciliation that needs to be done.
Question though, that would only be for emergency work, correct?
Nope.
No? Okay.
Yep, if you happen to do permanent work repairs, which I'm sure the city of Keene has already done some of them, you can use that as well. It's just look at it, it's, what's the word? So if you do work that's completed for permanent work, you need to make sure that everything's done with your rules, regulations, codes and standards and all of that. So there is a risk to run with that, but I'm sure the city couldn't wait for it to be done. Fortunately, they have an engineer that, manages this stuff. So, but if we're looking at work to be completed, it kind of helps spec things out. Well, not spec them out, but, goes through everything and makes sure that it's done in compliance with the procedures.
But that would not be the same for projects that are in your mitigation plan that you want to do, but it's not
Right.
based on.
So if it's not-
That's what I'm talking.
Yeah, so if it's not damaged, that's where we'll work with Brian and the 404 mitigation and all of that. Yep.
Just didn't want people to go out and start doing your mitigation projects.
Right.
Before they get them approved.
No, thank you. Okay.
So with regard to act work, I mean, we've had sustained certainly an extensive amount of damage and the cost of which is going to be very difficult for the town to absorb. And so we are very concerned about the 25% match and being able to pick that up. And also insofar as for any particular part of the work that's done, whether we have to front the entire amount of money and be reimbursed, or whether it's sort of like a pay-as-you-go kind of thing. We're very confused and very worried, in anticipation of how to get through the process to be able to get a 75% match
Sure.
and still be able to, absorb the 25% that you're doing.
Let me split. So the 25%, honestly, something I'm personally concerned about the communities matching as well, because even 10 million, 25% of 10 million is a lot for small communities.
Sure.
And I think that's something that we've talked with Senator Kahn and Senator Gaida. If historically, after the Allsted floods in 2005, up until 2011, there was the funding where the state would cover 12.5 and the community 12.5. That went away in 2011. I think there's a push to maybe bring that back and see what we can do there. Otherwise, we have no way with the 25% to do anything about that, unfortunately. So I'm hopeful that will come forward. As far as the 75% in doing the work, so there's a couple ways we can do this. And I'm going to ask Vanessa, who's my right hand on this, she's remote. So Vanessa, chime in here if you need to, but we can reimburse periodically or even do a cash advance. So the town of Groton was severely damaged in July 2019, but also July 2017. And we're working with them to do cash advancements periodically for their projects because they just don't have the cash flow to do that. It's limited with how much we can do at any given time, but it's not a problem to do that, so that if we need to front some of the money, and then we'll work through the reconciliation. Vanessa, is there anything else I missed on that?
Are you able to hear me okay, Fallon? Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's correct. So we do need to have the large project obligated prior, obligated by FEMA prior to being able to do a cash advance. But that is definitely a method that we can use to help communities with cash flow. There are some additional things that we do with projects like that. So we want to make sure that the town has the work lined up and ready to execute, within 30 to 60 days prior to requesting that cash advance, just to make sure that the money is moving through the program smoothly. But that's something absolutely that we can discuss with the communities and assist with, definitely.
With regard to timeline and deadlines, obviously there's not a whole lot of work that can be done in the winter because of frozen road, frozen ground and work conditions, that
Sure.
kind of thing. So how does that work with being able to get the work done, say in the spring?
Yeah, absolutely. So the winter's a great time to do project scoping and developing out what it will look like. However, that's a perfect reason to ask for an extension. It's because of the shortened construction period in New Hampshire. You know, if we were in Georgia, we'd be able to work year round and do that. But the deadlines as far as getting the work completed, because we have a short window of opportunity in the state, we can certainly ask for an extension to work through it. So we'll focus with you all to get the emergency work done, so the roads are passable and we can plow them. And then likely in the spring and summer, you know, try to get as much work as we can done over the winter on all the administrative side, so that come, you know, as soon as the ground's thawed, we can actually start doing some of the permanent work. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So we have the potential, with two executive counselors being on this call, meeting, for the exceptional disaster relief loan, and seeing as the initial award would be 50% of any project that's going to be approved by FEMA, right? I mean, right? Gets approved. I'll get real. Say we've got $10 million worth of projects.
Yep.
That are making it through the pipeline.
Yep.
If 50% is the estimated, you know, going to be awarded.
For a cash advance. But if the work's completed, we'll reimburse that.
100%.
Yeah, for 75.
Where I'm trying to get to is that the exceptional disaster relief loan is a governor and council approved amount.
Sure.
And whether it's by town or by disaster, for multiple towns, Representative Aaron's, Senator Ward knows, you know, I'm trying to look at this not on a town by town basis,
Right.
but a disaster
Right.
basis, and then we create a pool of dollars that's sufficient to not just cover the 25%, doesn't need to be drawn upon, but at least it's there for, you know, there was one action that set up a fund to cover where towns or the state might be shy of the money that's needed to move forward.
Sure. So like Representative Aaron was asking about cash advance or something like that, that will still take several months to get to. However, with the exceptional disaster relief loan that Senator Gaida had established, and this would be the first time that we could use that, the state could give that money now. And then when FEMA is able to reimburse, that's where we would kind of take care of it. And that, I understand that's the problem now, as it is with many of our summer storms. And by the time the disaster, we're only looking at a couple of weeks, if we're lucky, to be able to do this work so that the roads can be open. So certainly that was the intent of the exceptional disaster relief loan, to be able to give the community some money right away. And then when FEMA is able to come in, validate and do all of that, you know, we'll clear the, you know, reimburse the state that money and do all that, but that doesn't hinder the work. Because right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your hands are tied in the community, you know, short of asking everyone to bring a couple shovels and, you know, whatnot, they don't have the funding to do it. And, you know, we're already in the first week of October. I don't want another snowstorm in October, but it could happen. So yes, definitely that would be the quickest option and to do that. So
The biggest worry that we have is between now and this time we can repair roads. If we have another big storm,
Sure.
it's just going to further erode and damage what we have damaged.
right, and cut off more people and more services and all of that, right? So that's the kind of the general applicant briefing. I don't know if there are other questions. I feel bad my back's to you all, but or anyone else. All of this information will be made available online and we can send it out to folks. The recording will be online. But my staff will work one-on-one with each of the applicants and go through this, basically be attached at your hip the entire process to navigate the system with FEMA. And Will and his team will work very closely to go as fast as we can, but knowing that this is not a fast process. So.
I just have also another question. My town administrator, Kathy Gratt, is she on this call? You know?
I do not see her.
Okay.
We will be doing more applicant briefings as well. this just happened. We asked Senator Kahn if we could commandeer his meeting because most of the same people would be here. So we'll be doing at least one more in person, likely in Sullivan County, and then another virtual one. And if we need to do more, we will as well. But we didn't want to miss the opportunity since we had most people.
I saw Don Lucier.
Yeah, a quick question on your list of eligible activities for management costs. I didn't see preparing the PDAs.
Yeah, I don't think that's eligible because it was before the disaster declaration, but I will confirm that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I want to ask this other question, because I know the towns are going to face this question. If they had a culvert running underneath a right of way on somebody's driveway,
Yeah.
and that culvert or whatever that is carrying the water, washes out, floods, erodes the driveway, homeowner has damage, town has damage. Where does the private interest? It came up on page 24 when you talked about private roads. What are the limits of private roads?
Sure. So really, when it comes to private roads, the only thing that is potentially eligible is emergency access. So if it's the only way in and out or cuts off or things like that. But we do run into a lot of times where a culvert washes out under someone's driveway. It's right on town property. And that's where you get into identifying, was the culvert town owned, or who's responsible for the maintenance and work. It's clear as mud and is honestly a case by case basis that we would have to look at. But it gets a little bit complicated because there's a bunch of different factors that run into it. How far is the easement? Or I don't know if easement's the proper word, but how much, yeah. So we'd have to look at each individual one. I know Bartlett had a number of issues with that as well, a couple of storms ago, where it got, the culverts under from where the driveway connects to the main road and all of that. And we'd have to look at it, so.
There are no other questions. Thank you, Ken, Fallon, Grant, for your preparation.
Sure.
And Vanessa for being available.
Vanessa did just message me that the management cost guidance that's in your packet does include PDAs.
It does.
So it's in the interim policy. So double check that. So thank you for the phone a friend, Vanessa.
I don't know if there's anything more in chat, Rod, right now.
Not currently.
Okay, so I want to ask some of the other guests that have joined us. Shane, I see you're still there. Why don't we, and David, you're still there. One of you wanting to go first? I see you're both on. All right, Shane, you're unmuted.
Well, can I take a moment?
David's there. He's even live.
Can I just embarrass you for a moment?
Go ahead.
Was recently promoted, so we're super excited. And I don't remember your official title, but it took me several years to remember you were the fluvial geomorphologist. So what's your new official director of everything?
Director of the New Hampshire Geological Survey and state geologist.
So congratulations.
And I
Very excited for you.
And I appreciate that, Fallon, although I would have been very happy to just kind of stay under the radar, but I very much appreciate the congratulations. Dave, did you want to actually speak first? Because I think the senator was asking me to talk a bit about the geodatabase. So I defer to you, Dave, if you'd like to speak first.
Thanks, Shane. You're all set. Go ahead. I'm always happy to hear what you have to say, so I'll stick around. Thanks.
Well, let me, I'm going to be very brief. Let me see if I can share my screen. everybody should see a map, and it's centered on the town of Surrey. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay. And I talked about this at the August 16th meeting, but for the benefit of those who are on the call today who may not have been there, one of the projects that both Homeland Security and Emergency Management and the New Hampshire Geological Survey have worked on over the past 5 years is, this was a brainchild of HSCM starting about 5 to 6 years ago, was establishing a statewide flood hazards geodatabase. The purpose is essentially to document for every town in the state in the statewide layer, which is what is displayed here, the locations of all the different areas in a community that have been documented by a town, either in a hazard mitigation plan or by the National Weather Service in a local storm report, or through real-time damage reports that are submitted to the Web EOC by a town, the HSCM's Web EOC application, where damage reports are submitted in real time during an event by local road agents or local emergency management directors. The general idea is to have a statewide integrated geodatabase of all the different areas of flood impact to help communities better being able to not only, one, have a long-term record of all the areas in their towns that have been impacted by a flooding event. And by a flooding event, that can be standard flooding, such as flood inundation, or riverine erosion, river meanders, eroding stream banks, which occurs in this part of the state as well as up in the North Country because of the steep slopes of the streams, as well as road flooding, culvert blowouts, and so forth. And to capture that local knowledge, particularly before many road agents and communities who have that information after a career retire, and secondly, also to be able to maximize the ability for communities to be able to apply for mitigation funding for culvert upsizing, culvert upgrades, and other mitigation projects. One of the requirements for particularly the mitigation funding side of things that Fallon was talking about in her talk is repeat offenders. So basically having a geodatabase that amasses over a period of time repeat events and documenting those. So we went through and met with a number of communities and sat down with them and basically went with a map, and town officials were very happy to draw all their flood areas of impact. And that is what is indicated here for the town of Surrey. We went through every town's hazard mitigation plan and input all the identified areas of flood concern that a community had into this geodatabase. This database has evolved so that when a hazard mitigation plan is updated, Southwest New Hampshire Regional Planning Commission, I saw Lisa in the room there on the screen, her and Henry Underwood actually go in and take the information from those meetings, and they populate this geodatabase. They have access to this geodatabase. And basically the idea is to have a complete flood record. And I think you should be able to see this attribute table that I just dragged over. And essentially for every one of those polygons, we have a record of where the source of the information is, the description, the flooding event that occurred there. One of the key fields, of course, I just referenced is the date of an occurrence. And from that, we're able to calculate the frequency of occurrence of a different impact. The impact, how the town ranked it, whether it's a high impact, in other words, it's very highly disruptive to a town, medium or low. We document if it impacts a culvert, which that's been a lot of our issues across the state, as well as its location, and whether or not under mitigation action, whether or not a particular area has actually already had been mitigated once or multiple times. We document the Regional Planning Commission as well. We went through and did basically an enhancement of the database procedure last year through a Silver Jackets project. One of the key things to take home from this, a couple things. One of them is that, and I'll refresh my view here. One of them is that the information that goes into this geodatabase is only as good as the information we receive. So when people put information in the web EOC, for example, if there's not, if someone puts in information and we understand you're in the middle of a disaster, middle of a flood event, you're trying to just get the information into the HSEM, if we don't have specific identifying information about a specific river or a specific road within a couple of points, where on that road it is, some nearby addresses, it does become somewhat hard for us to get the information in. But we do try to get it in as best as we can. We go into web EOC after an event and try to get this geodatabase populated. So we have a whole guidebook that's available for towns to be able to know what specific information we're looking for to get this information into the geodatabase. Secondly, if you're looking to secure additional funds beyond the mitigation program to upsize culverts, there are some other funding programs available, such as the Aquatic Resource Mitigation Program at DES. There is a fish passage component to that, of course, and an aquatic habitat component. However, they recently updated the rules that go with those funds. And so if you have a project, a culvert you want to replace, and it's in the area of one of these flood hazard areas that have been identified within this geodatabase, you will get a couple extra points toward your application to those funds for a culvert replacement if you're seeking mitigation funds for that. There has been discussion since the flooding events occurred in southwest New Hampshire about basically an integrated database of all of the impacts that have occurred as a result of this event to maximize flood events. We also have access to FEMA's grant portal, as information is submitted to grant portal after the disaster declaration occurs and damage surveys and reports start going in there for funding. We then consume that information and get this information populated. I think a key take-home message is that one, as your hazard mitigation plans are updated, I know that Southwest is working to update this geodatabase for each of the towns in your area so that it is updated. Secondly, if any of the towns on the call have information or want to review the information for their town, they have two options available to reach out and review the information for their town for its accuracy and currency, and have the option to update it. One of those is you can contact Southwest Regional Planning Commission. You can contact Lisa Murphy, and she can provide you access to the data for your town. Secondly, you can contact us here in the New Hampshire Geological Survey. We can also work with you to provide you the information. And if you want to review it and provide edits and updates, if, for example, you see that there's information from this last event that's not currently in there, that you feel needs to get in there so that we have a full record to support, the grant applications that we're talking about, you can contact either one of us and we can work with you to get that information in. We have a staff person here in the survey that we can even send out to meet with you if you want to sit down and talk about getting information that you may have from pictures and records into this portal. So that's that's the quick overview of the flood hazards geodatabase.
Any questions that folks have for Shane? It's great to see the visual, Shane. I've gone through the database. I can see many towns that are quite up to date with July and August dates there. And I can also see some towns that have the last incident reported in 2019. And I know they had high impact areas recurring in spots. So I think your point about one, documenting, and two, that some of these are recurring, is a really valuable point. I don't know how these affect the applications for this round. Is there a connection that you see?
So as far as the damages and things from these storms, we'll work with the damage inventory and identify that. And Shane has access to Grant Portal and can see some of the damage locations, and we'll work on adding all of that. As far as applications for the 404 side of mitigation, the program, Shane's database and everything helps to show the historical impacts and that it happens regularly or whatever the case may be. So we work very closely, Shane and I on all of this, and it'll help, but the more information we can put in the database, the better for all the projects.
Anything else? David, thank you, Shane. And I suspect you'll get some requests, so will Lisa. She left. All right, David?
Yes, good afternoon, Senator, and others in attendance. I just want to thank you, Senator. I want to thank the counselors, the other senators and representatives for bringing everybody together to keep focus on this area. And of course, Homeland Security, Fallon and Jen, wonderful job presenting the information. The DOT is an applicant to this program for resources to help to fix our assets. And we remain committed to doing that and bringing all the resources that we have available to keep us working towards that repair. And we also want to be here if the towns have questions or when the emergencies occur as they need things, so that we can help them get those requests filled. That's all I have. Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, David, for your follow through. I know, David, you coordinate all of the district offices, right? So John Calfels would be your supervisor here for both Cheshire and Sullivan counties, right?
That's correct. John's our local district engineer out of our Swansea office.
Right. So we've got a couple of levels of resource for towns that can be in communication should they need any follow-up work.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, David, for your responsiveness. I know your department has been communicating out on the work that you're doing, in particular Charlestown. And I don't know if you've got any other active job sites related to these two disaster declarations.
Yeah, so we're still completing some of our pavement cleanup in some areas to get ready for the winter. And of course, we have some work still to design and get out to bid on 123A, but in Allstead by Vila's Pool as well. So we're through our emergency response, but we will be active in our permanent repair for these disasters or for these locations that continue to need some work to bring back to full repair. We'll also be looking at our pipes that we did some emergency repair on and see what permanent repair may be appropriate to meet the current DES regulations and so forth for size.
David, would you put an email address in, if there's anyone on this call who's not receiving and would like to receive updates on those two project locations, who they should contact so that they're receiving those updates?
Yes, absolutely, Senator. I'll put my email and anybody can email me and I'll get those to Kathy Mulcahy Hampson, we'll include them on future updates.
Thank you. And Jen, we're getting near 3 and reaching limits. There are other programs that HSEM administers that towns could be applying for and calling to the attention of others in your office, right?
Yeah, so Fallon mentioned the email that went out from Brian talking about hazard mitigation plan programs. So Brian is here in the room, but folks, if they have questions, certainly Brian Eaton is so if we're talking about a community's hazard mitigation plan and things that they've outlined in their plan where they want to do some work, the money is there for towns to submit a letter of interest and work with Brian and the staff on that process.
One of the things I forgot to mention, so with these 2 disasters, we have the additional 15%, but the president had allowed for the COVID disaster, I believe it's 4% for mitigation. So we have another almost $9 million available for mitigation efforts, non-disaster related, coming down the pike as well. So now would be the time to jump on the mitigation bandwagon if folks have stuff in their plans they would like to work on. So
So
And then
there is both a federal allocation.
it's all federal, yep. So there's just a significant amount of money coming because of COVID. They just, the last couple months, said that they're giving out, is it 4%?
Yeah.
4% of our,
It is state designated.
it will come to the state, but we will then pass through to the local communities and others that want to do mitigation work.
Based on an award criteria that your department
Yep.
has. Is this 75-25?
It is, yep. So, but it's more money than we've ever seen for mitigation work, so.
This is the 3 million that you talked about in the past that comes to the state.
No, that's the MPG. Yeah.
So we get an annual award for hazard mitigation. Now we're getting 2 awards for the 2 July storms, and we're getting hazard mitigation monies for under COVID, but it's not COVID related. If you have a bridge you need to repair, then put in an application and we'll work through the process to see if we can get it approved. So
The short version is there's a significant amount of money coming to the state for hazard mitigation work. So the opportunities there to get some of those projects that folks have.
So to be clear for towns, if there's an interest in some mitigation that has become evident but may not qualify for a disaster project, that towns might either want to double file a letter of interest.
They only need to do one, and then Brian will be able to apply it to whatever programs is most applicable.
But if somebody is trying to do public assistance project and do a mitigation project, are those 2 letters of intent?
If they're 2 different projects,
If it's one project,
they just work on the PA side of it, and then we can work with them if PA doesn't cover it. Sure. So in your packet, there's a mitigation flyer, and I believe the contact information's on there. But let me just double check.
oh, it's this.
Yeah, Brian, is your contact info in the packet? Okay.
It's in the slide, yeah.
So in the, let me just find it real quick. On the 404 mitigation slide, the contact information should be on there. Let me. But I can make sure that it gets out for everyone. We have a generic email for hazard mitigation, And that way, if Brian's out of the office, the email doesn't get missed. So,
What phone number is for Brian?
so probably if you need a phone number, the easiest thing is our 603-271-2231. And then 603-271-2231. That's our main number. And we'll get to Brian for mitigation.
Brian's last name is?
Eaton, EATON.
Yeah.
And then Brian, what's the email?
Hazard mitigation planning at DOS.
Hazard mitigation planning at dos.nh.gov. But we'll make sure that we have that information as well.
And then the BRIC program?
Yep, so
is
Brian also
yet one
manages-
other
Yep.
program. And
So Brian also manages that program. So that's the perk of doing one letter of intent. And then he'll look at that and see what the best program to go from. Not sure, Brian, if you want to speak to BRIC at all or.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between BRIC and what we have with HMDP is that BRIC is operating every state. We receive a state allocation of that for the majority of the projects, like in the culverts and the HMDP. A lot of those projects go to the national competition. So benefit of applying an HMDP is that the project will only be competitive to other projects in the state. And typically, traditionally, it's been a faster time frame. So we're looking to utilize those HMDP funds under the two disasters and the COVID funding that we can post to the BRIC. But the BRIC does offer funds for us to fund the local hazard mitigation plan updates and things of those nature. So there are differences, mainly being that BRIC's offered annually while HMDP is only post-disaster declaration.
And would you just fill in the acronym stands for?
BRIC, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. It was renamed before it was PDM, which is pre-disaster mitigation. And they have very similar goals, BRIC and HMDP. These are very minor criteria for eligible projects. But overall, the major, they share most of the same goals and eligibility.
Hazard mitigation planning.
DOS. Dot NH.
Just a quick question, because again, it's similar to what I asked before, but I just got this into me. It's about HUD announces disaster assistance for New Hampshire disaster survivors. That's what you were talking about earlier?
We were talking about SBA.
Okay.
Yeah, so if HUD would be brand new, I haven't heard that. So,
Yeah, this is actually the Keith Sentinel just sent me this.
okay,
So it's, and he's on, they're on, I think they're on the call, but it's just that, this was just forwarded to me and said HUD announces disaster assistance for New Hampshire disaster survivors.
sure. Let me take a look at it real quick.
I just want to make sure if there's town administrators and ourselves, we get these calls, I want to make sure we direct them where we need to.
Yeah, let me digest this information and we can push some stuff out about it.
That would be great.
I hadn't heard that HUD had declared, so I will get right on that and then can kind of give some information, but
Thank you.
yep.
So, and I don't, we are passing, but FEMA folks, we haven't asked you anything yet, put you on the spot, but we were in conversation, Director Harper and I, with another agency, SBA, and it seems that different federal entities, departments, now that the disaster declaration has been issued, will independently enact programs that are there for disaster recovery. And are there any other, can you give us insights into any of the other programs that normally follow presidential disaster declarations?
Sort of depends on the type of disaster declaration, whether it includes individual assistance or public assistance. If there are many factors involved, I'll have to research it and get back to Jen and Grant on what specific other ones. This came from Louisiana for Ida. So HUD was obviously very much integrated because it impacted actual federal HUD facilities that house people. But with 123 different agencies within the government, I'm not sure which other ones have been instituted, but I owe that to the Jenny grant.
Glad to know it's 123. The Department of Agriculture is another department that I've seen trails the presidential declarations. We haven't seen one, but I know that there were definitely farms along the Cold River impacted in the second storm.
I think folks that I know have been in contact with USDA. Know what they needed to do to document their damage and whatnot. There's a woman in Ackworth who was kind of commandeering the effort. Her name was Kristen Galvin. She was working with this USDA and Farm Bureau. Some of these farmers.
So I think this is, Judy, what we're getting to is where's the manual, it might say, and so follow up with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and that probably be a good thing to add into our inventory of contact. Councilor Warmington.
Thank you, Senator, for hosting today, bringing us all together. Thank Jen, found all this information. You said you were going to hold another applicant meeting or more than one, obviously, given the 30 days, and those need to happen soon, and people need to know about them. I would just ask that you make sure you push that information out to us as soon as possible so that we can get that out to everyone. And if we could actually have an electronic link to the forms, that would be very helpful as well.
Definitely. It's, the director and I were just chatting about possibly harassing Representative Aaron to host one in Ackworth, if possible. So, and then we'll do one virtually as well. But yes, all of the, and I actually can show folks very quickly where everything is on our website.
It might be hard to get to.
Yeah.
People were getting lost all over the place.
Let me just share my.
So many tractor trailers get jackknifed because they can't. They don't know where they're going.
There is Charlestown, there is, and you've got your options.
Yeah. So on our website, which if you just do nh.gov/HSEM, you'll see this lovely picture of Director Harper. That's how you know you're in the right spot. And over on the right side, there is a button for the Resource Center. You might not be able to see. Thank you. So this Resource Center, you click on there. And then we will change the quick link for public assistance. Right now it's COVID, but you'll see the public assistance. We go to that website. There's a lot of the information about public assistance. If you scroll down a bit, and like I said, we'll fast link it right on our homepage. Current disasters and incidents. And then the first two are these two disasters with a lot of the information. We'll put the PowerPoint up on here as well as all the other files. We were doing some last minute editing this morning before we headed over here. So we'll have everything up either later today or definitely by first thing tomorrow. And we'll make sure all the information's out to everyone as well.
And the forms will be at this site.
Yep, the request for public assistance is actually the second line down, and it's an electronic form that you can fill out. And then you get an email confirmation that you submitted it, and that is just as good as the paper form that's in your packet as well. So whichever way folks want to do it, they can do it electronically here. If they already have access to grant portal, they can do it there, or worst case, handwrite it out, scan it, email it, fax it, take a picture, text me. Whichever way works for folks, we'll do that.
When you say the grants portal, is that a FEMA specific thing or is that the grants.gov?
It's the FEMA specific.
It's FEMA specific.
Yep. So I actually don't know if Court has access to it. Actually, he probably does because of COVID.
Yeah.
And so you guys can go in there and just do it that way if you want. Yep. So all the information will be up here, but we will put a quick link on our homepage as well. So, but I anticipate the applicant briefings likely the beginning of next week, the other ones as well. We just usually would do them kind of consecutively in days, but we didn't want to pass up the opportunity where Senator Kahn had already grabbed everyone. So I probably owe him an ice cream or something for taking over his meeting. So
I think we owe you. So if there are no other questions, anything in the chat?
No, we're good right
Those are
now.
the addresses that might be in the chat before we close this out. And thank you, Rod Bouchard and Chris Coates, Cheshire County, for hosting today's meeting and our web Zoom. Thank you very much.
yes, thank you.
Thank you all for attending, and Homeland Security, Emergency Management, thank you very much for organizing yourselves so quickly.
No problem.